You know how we often picture people who believe in conspiracies? Kind of like rebels, right? Lone wolves who just automatically reject everything mainstream? But what if that whole stereotype is just completely wrong? Well, a brand new, groundbreaking study from the Journal of Social Psychology suggests we might have it all backwards.
So that brings us to the big question. Are these folks really immune to peer pressure? And on the face of it, the answer seems like a pretty obvious yes. I mean, they're contrarians by nature, aren't they? They're not just going to go along with the crowd. But, as we're about to see, the science tells a much more surprising story. Okay, so before we dive into the actual data, let's just paint a really clear picture of this common stereotype that we're about to put under the microscope. This is the image that pops into most of our heads.
Now, this profile isn't just a guess, it's actually based on a lot of previous research. Psychologists have found that on average, people with stronger conspiracy beliefs tend to have a higher need to feel unique. They also tend to care less about following social norms and often have this kind of general distrust of other people. It all paints this picture of someone who is psychologically hardwired to go against the grain.
And when you put all that together, you get this very simple, very intuitive assumption. If you're distrustful and you want to be unique, you're probably just going to reject whatever the majority thinks, kind of by default. It seems like a perfectly logical conclusion, right?
But is it actually true? I mean, science is all about testing our assumptions, no matter how much sense they seem to make. So how in the world could you design an experiment to figure out if this stereotype really holds up?
Well, this is where it gets really cool. To find out, a team of researchers designed this brilliant series of 5 different experiments with over 1,600 people, and their goal was to zero in on one very specific question. Does believing in conspiracies actually make you immune to the pull of the crowd?
The setup was so simple, but so elegant. First, they'd show people a topic they probably knew nothing about. Then, they'd tell them what the majority of people thought about it. And only then would they ask for the person's own opinion. It's kind of like asking if you like a new band, but only after I've told you whether they're topping the charts or still just playing in some dusty garage.
The real genius of this whole study was in the topics they picked. They were intentionally, kind of boring. And they had absolutely nothing to do with conspiracies. This wasn't about JFK or 9/11. By using these totally neutral subjects, like a tunnel in Belgium or a choice between a pottery or shoemaking museum, the researchers could measure the pure, raw effect of majority influence without any of the other baggage getting in the way. Okay, so the stage is set. Based on that rebel stereotype we talked about, pretty much everyone, the public and probably even the researchers themselves, would have bet on one clear outcome. The people who scored high on conspiracy beliefs would be the ones least likely to follow the majority.
So, what did they find? After 5 studies with all those 1,600 participants, what did the numbers actually say when they were all crunched?
And the result was absolutely stunning. The expectation was a super clear link. The more you believe in conspiracies, the less you'd be influenced by the crowd. But the reality? Across all 5 studies, a person's level of conspiracy belief had no consistent effect. None, on how much they were swayed by what the majority thought.
I mean, just think about that for a second. The people with high conspiracy beliefs were just as likely to go along with the crowd on these random, neutral topics as people with low conspiracy beliefs. That whole rebel, contrarian stereotype, it just completely failed to show up in the data.
Now, to get the most precise picture possible, the researchers combined the results of all 5 studies. It's something called a meta-analysis. They wanted to see if there was any statistical relationship there at all, and they boiled their entire finding down to this one single number.
So what in the world does negative 0.04 mean? Well, in statistics, you measure relationships on a scale from -1 to +1. A +1 means 2 things are perfectly in sync. A -1 means they're perfect opposites. And a 0? That means there's just no relationship at all. A value of negative 0.04 is so incredibly close to 0 that it's statistically meaningless. In other words, there's simply no link.
In fact, don't just take my word for it. Here are the researchers' own words. Our studies provide no evidence that they reject majority opinions per se. The data simply wasn't there.
So what, right? Why does busting this one stereotype actually matter in the real world? Well, this is where the research gets incredibly hopeful, and it really offers us a new way of thinking.
This finding directly pushes back against that defeatist idea that these individuals are just unreachable, living in some completely separate reality. What it suggests is that on a fundamental psychological level, they respond to social cues and peer pressure pretty much just like everybody else does.
And this has massive implications. It means they aren't totally immune to social influence. It suggests that communication strategies that are based on social norms, the kind we use in public health or to encourage good behavior, might actually have a chance to work. It basically opens up new avenues for dialogue that many of us probably thought were completely closed off.
So we've debunked a major stereotype. But that leaves us with a new and, I think, an even more interesting question. If they aren't just knee-jerk contrarians, then what does explain the norm-breaking behavior that we sometimes see? The researchers think it could be a reaction against authority or about specific interests, not just a blanket rejection of the crowd. And that, well, that's a puzzle for the next explainer.